Okay, next character. Delroy Lindo
Delta
as
Slim.
Delta Slim.
What a name.
Yeah, man, he was so good in this.
He really
So
was.
anybody that doesn't know Delroy Lindo, he's in Get Shorty, The Five Bloods, The Core, Malcolm X, and my personal favorite, The One with Jet Li.
Indeed.
Yep. But also, he's in Congo as the guy at the airport that's like, "Stop eating my sesame cake."
That I don't remember, but I'm in for
You
it.
don't remember that? You got to Google that, man. It's the funniest scene ever. He's yelling at Tim Curry for eating his sesame cake.
What a scene. Tim Curry and him yelling about
Yeah,
cake.
it's great. Yeah, so check that out, please.
I'll have to.
It's one of the best scenes in cinematic history. Just watch that scene instead of the whole movie. But
I
yeah,
might do that.
so
I'll definitely do that.
do it. So his character is a major, major standout in the movie. I think he has a chance to get the best supporting actor nomination for this. You know, as I said before, he's put forth performances many times that deserved it, but I think it's his best last chance, right?
This is his best shot. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So far.
Yeah. So he completely nails it. He was talking about how he prepared for this, and he read a number of books. He said that Ryan Coogler gave him multiple books of these different people that he could base this character on, and then he read some of his own. Delroy Lindo, for anybody that doesn't know, was born in the UK. He's lived in the US long enough that he doesn't really have an accent anymore. And he said one of the things that also really stood out to me is, so that whole scene with Delta Slim when they're in the car riding away after they've picked him up and they're riding through all the cotton fields and the plantations and everything, and he's telling this story about what happened to him and his friends, and how his friend was framed for robbery and then lynched in the
Yep.
train station. And the sound effects that they had behind that too were it was, I don't know, it was so powerful through that whole scene. But one of the things he had said was that for a portion of filming, him and Michael B. Jordan and Miles would use that car as sort of their area for digging into these characters. So they would just rehearse and they would try things out. And one of the things that he actually improvised and they went along with was the end of that scene where he starts breaking out into song. That was completely improv. He just went for that in the moment. And Michael B. Jordan and Miles, the way they react to it is genuine, which is interesting because Michael B. Jordan's like, "Hey, you got a guitar.
Play it. Yeah.
Yeah, go along with it." And then he just starts, playing along. And so it's interesting because knowing that that's genuine, it's like, yeah, that is how you would react, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So his character, it makes sense for the character, but it also makes sense for them in real life to react that way,
Yeah.
But the way he reacts to in that scene, when he, like, you can see the pain and just how much it's tearing him up inside, and he's fully in character in the way he sort of like mumbles his way into song and like flutters there for a moment between song and pain. The fact that was completely improvised is just, it's crazy to me. And I think that's the scene that if they're going to show anybody, to showcase him as a best supporting actor, that's the scene they put forth.
Well, yeah. There's like I think it might be called a hot reel that they put out for like nominations or such like that for like the Golden Globes and such. And you got to put that on there if you're going to promote him for that reward.
Yeah.
Because it is that good.
Yep.
Yeah, he's just really good. Like he's playing the piano, he's just having a good time, he's drinking and he's great.
Yeah, he's having a ton of fun once they get to the juke joint. And all those scenes in the juke joint are phenomenal, and he's really, really killing it in all of them.
You can't argue with any of that. Yeah, he was a standout for sure.
Yeah. All right, Hailee Steinfeld as Mary. I think Hailee Steinfeld really doesn't need any introduction. She does a lot. She's in a little bit of everything. My personal favorite being True Grit. I think this is her best performance since True Grit, in all honesty.
And she was Oscar nominated for that.
Yeah. I could go for her being nominated for this. I think she puts forward a very, very good performance. And, I mean, they hinged the marketing on her performance when she turns into a vampire.
Right.
And I want to talk about that for a moment. So, one of the things that really stood out for her character for me was that I thought, having only seen the trailer, that she was one of the main vampires. That she was one of the ones that was like just showing up there and hunting them.
Yeah.
But when you first meet her, it's in the daylight at the train station.
Right.
And I was just like, oh. Like, because the moment you meet her, you know she's going to die.
Yeah. Same way. I was the same way. I thought she's going to rock up to the party, walk in, be sultry, and then try to turn Stack, obviously, from the trailer into a vampire. And that's not what happened at all. They gave her a backstory. They had her tie into the twins growing up.
Yep, so just this character that you know is doomed the entire time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know that she's not going to make it.
Yeah. So it made it like that much more tragic as all of that is transpiring. But despite all that, she does do a really great job in this.
Right.
One interesting thing I saw her talk about in an interview was that she said that this role helped her work out sort of a lot of those feelings and emotions that she had, because how her character has a black grandfather, she has a black grandfather. And so that's a real fact, which she hadn't really like sort of worked out, you know?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so she said through her conversations with Coogler and everybody else on this movie, it helped her really figure those things out for herself and what that means to her, you know?
That's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, because one of the things is that during this era, and this is what they allude everything to, is that Michael B. Jordan's character is basically like, hey, right now, you know, everybody doesn't know that your grandfather's black. You can survive here more than we can, and you should. And that's why he pushes her away, because he wants her to live a better life than they're all living. You know, he doesn't want her to struggle the way he is. Right. You know, all those things. And on top of that, I mean, she could get killed for them finding out, you know, because especially with the way the Ku Klux Klan is in this area,
Jim Crow South,
yeah, they would easily lynch somebody for hiding the fact that they had black people in their blood. Yeah. It adds a really interesting dynamic to her character, because all those small details that they add onto each one of these characters, it adds to the history. You know, like every one of these characters has some sort of tie-in to history that's making their character that much more rich, you know?
To each other, too. Yeah, that's what you mean, right?
Well, I mean, like, so, like, everything I just said about her, like, her character, it's held in all of these historical things, you know?
Oh, sure,
so
yeah,
you can look at these aspects of the character, and there's a ton to dig into because it's based on a historical context, you know?
Right. Okay, I get you.
You got anything else for Hailee Steinfield?
Nope. I thought she was fantastic, and unfortunately, not to belittle it, but like it stinks that was what they used for marketing, was her big reveal, you know. But like, they had to sell the movie somehow, you know.
They did, and I can't fault them for it. And I think that the way audiences in the future react to that is going to be really interesting. You know, people that haven't seen the trailer, you know.
Yeah, because there's a scene where like you see her and like you see her back shoulder, and then you see the bite, and you're like, oh, well. If you didn't see the trailer, you make the connection, but you knew it was coming from the trailer, which that's just how movies work.
I heard a lot of people jump when Remmick flies in the background behind her.
Yeah, it's not an overly violent movie either. Like a lot of the violence kind of happens off screen. Like, well, at least with the vampire part, the shootout at the end there was definitely not off screen, but
yeah, but that's like completely okay, you know, because that's like action movie violence.
Exactly.
Okay, so next up, Jayme Lawson. So she is the woman that plays Pearline.
Pearline.
So she's been in a bunch of things, but this is the first one where I really took note of her. And so she was in the movie Till, and she was also in the movie The Woman King. Have you seen that?
I haven't seen The Woman King. You brought it up a few times. I need to watch it.
The Woman King is very good. I highly recommend that one. It's got a big cast. Once I saw the picture of her character, I was like, yes, I remember that character. I just didn't know who she was at that point. The other thing that she's been in that I know you've seen is she is in The Batman and the Penguin as the new mayor.
Really?
Yeah, you know the one that scolds Bruce Wayne at the funeral and then gets
Mm-hmm.
shot during the finale?
Right.
Yeah, that's her.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah, so I have to imagine that people over at DC right now are sitting there like, oh, we gotta expand that role a little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah. So she's absolutely phenomenal in this movie. The scene with her performing on the stage is so good. It's an unbelievable performance, you know?
Yeah, she's stopping around and singing.
Yeah, and I had seen online somebody talking about the woman that actually had made that song, that performed it.
Mhm.
And she was talking about how much of a great experience it was to make that and then see it come to life in the movie. And that's one of those scenes that stands out, that I think that those performances from a musical standpoint, it's like, oh man, you need to see this movie. You need to see this happen. You know, don't let the horror aspects of it hold you back, because those things are so rich, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And we kind of move past it. Like, she is kind of the love interest for Sammy too. So that's how she ties in too. Like, she shows up. She's a married woman, but you know, there's obviously chemistry there, and he just goes after her consistently the whole night, and you kind of root for both of them to figure it out.
Yeah, you do. And you can tell that she really has an impact on Sammy's character, because at the end of it, you can see that I was so both times in, having seen it twice now, I'm unclear as to whether it's the name of the band or the name of the bar. The first time I thought it was the name of the bar. The second time I was like, oh, that kind of looks like it might be the name of the band.
I took his name
Uh,
of the band.
yeah, I mean that's what I thought when I saw it last night. I was like, oh, well, it's behind the band, and
Yeah,
so I think it's I think that's what it is. But so you can tell that she really had an impact on him, because that's who he named his band after. We'll say band
right.
for the sake of argument.
Yeah. There's that scene at the end too where he talks about how it was his best night of his life until, well, it was the best day of his life until the sun went down.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
she had quite an impact.
She did, and you know the actress she's very captivating
Mhm.
in all of those scenes. That's one of those things, is like each one of these characters kind of gets their own time to shine, and that scene is hers. You know,
Yeah.
where Michael B. Jordan kind of gets every scene to shine. You
Mhm.
know, but that was her big scene, is the performance that she does where she's singing.
I agree with that. Yeah, she's really good, and it's nice. Again, not to belabor a point, but like, see people you don't really know get exposure like this.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's talk about the big guy,
Big guy.
Jack O'Connell as
Yeah,
Remmick.
yeah.
So going into this, I had sort of like, I don't know, minimal expectations out of what we were going to get out of him, because I didn't really know him as an actor.
Hmm. Me neither.
And I wasn't sure if he was going to be like a little bit too over the top or something like that, you know? But with all that being said, he was not.
No, he was menacing, but not like a cartoon character.
Yeah, and he plays sort of the Irishness of
Hmm.
this character very, very well. And you can just tell that this character he's been around for, I would have to venture to say, hundreds of years, right?
Yeah, yeah. Because he talks about the
But
whole Irish famine and people getting forced out of their house in Ireland and such.
yeah, and when was that?
I don't know, but I'm pretty sure it was way well before this movie was based. It was way before 1930.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so his character, when he comes in, you get bits and pieces of his character,
Hmm.
you know, leading into the point where he's just doing the singing thing. But once he really takes off and he's doing the big Irish chant out in the middle of the
Hmm.
field, and everybody's running around him. He nails that performance that he does in there.
Yeah, and that's completely right. So his vampire has kind of a hive mind situation going on. Like
Right.
I don't know if he's the one that has all the musical talent, but anyone who he turns from his first couple victims become like he shows up with them as his band to try to get into the juke joint. And that was just an interesting way to, I don't know if I've ever seen a vampire portrayed like that, as like
Yeah.
he has kind of not control but influence over. Well, I mean, vampires influence people. I guess it's always been a thing, but like to that extent.
It seems like he has a lot of influence over them, right? And
Right.
I kind of get the vibe that he collects these talents.
Hmm. Yeah, that's why you want Sammy.
And yeah, and he seems to have a flair for music. And so he decided here because I mean, he didn't need to. He's fighting very hard for this place. He's
Hmm.
turned by the end of this. He's turned like 100 people. You
Oh yeah.
know, I think that the moment he sees that there's a musical component to this, he's like, I need this. It's a really interesting aspect to his character that they introduced there, where I don't think he mind controls them necessarily, but I think it does almost like it's like heavy influence is the vibe
Yeah.
I get, right?
Well, I mean, there's the whole. You mentioned it. There's that whole awesome scene where he's playing, and like the whole crowd of vampires is swirling around him and dancing and clapping, and you're like, they didn't rehearse this. Like you're like, well, he's making the show. He's making this happen.
Yeah, yeah. So I think there's a certain amount of that, and I think that there's probably some telekinesis going on, right?
Yeah.
And they all have his memories now too.
No. Yeah. They did say that. They did say that it's they absorb each other's being a little bit.
Yeah, and so it seems like, especially with those two people he takes,
The
he
first two,
strips sort of the first two. He
the Ku
sort of
Klux
strips
Klan.
the Ku Klux Klanness out of
Yep.
them
Yep.
and is like, okay, that part of you is gone, right?
Yep. Yep.
And now you're getting rid of that, and you are embracing this part of all of it.
Yep.
And I almost think that when he dies, that's when Stack and Mary really become their sort of true selves, so to speak, as vampires.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can agree with that too because they say multiple times in this version of vampires at least, if you kill the one who makes the subsequent vampires, it doesn't free the ones he made, which is sometimes a thing in vampire lore. But
Yeah.
they say it multiple times, like doesn't work that way this time. So
Yeah. But I think that the influence he had is gone, and I think that's why Sammy is able to get away. Because I think if this guy was still around, he'd probably have
no, no,
Mary and Stack still chasing Sammy.
no,
I don't think
absolutely,
I don't think they could have resisted that if Remmick was still around after
yeah,
this movie. But since he's gone, they're now sort of free, so to speak.
hmm,
They're still restricted by the urges that come with being a vampire, but they don't have his agenda.
influence. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's really interesting the way they establish all that. All of those scenes where he's doing these Irish numbers, musical numbers, those really lean into that whole idea of, the devil at the crossroads or
Hmm.
the devil went down to Georgia.
Hmm.
That's the one that really stood out to me, is that he's doing all of this as a show, I
Hmm.
think.
Yeah,
To Sammy. So part of it wants to scare them. The other part of it, he wants to impress them and be like, hey, this is like, you guys could be in on this. This is pretty awesome, right? Like, I
yeah,
can do this, what you were doing too, but it's not what they were doing, right?
yeah. And there's a great scene too. Just one reference real quick when like they show up to the juke joint, they're trying to get allowed in, obviously to massacre the place, but they didn't know at the time. But they're trying to say, "We'll play," and they play a little number, and like Cornbread's like, "It's pretty good."
Yeah. One thing that I saw too for Jack O'Connell, so he was in Unbroken, Ferrari, and Godless. I've not seen Unbroken or Ferrari, but he's like the main guy in Unbroken.
What's Unbroken?
I think it's a World War One thing where like a guy is like a POW
Oh,
and
okay.
they escape and they're stuck on a boat or something.
Yep, I got you now. I remember the trailers.
Yeah. You never saw that either? It seems like a you
No,
movie.
it does. I missed it.
Well, we're also about to see him as the cult leader in 28 Years Later.
Yep. I did see
So
that
he
was
said
coming.
that's probably his darkest role yet. So I'm looking forward to seeing him in that.
Heck yeah. And real quick, just about his vampire design. It's very subtle and understated at first, and by the end of the movie, it's full on horror movie creature, and I love it. I thought it was fantastic because like that's one of the things I said I wanted out of this movie. I wanted scary vampires, and they
Yeah.
are scary vampires. They're not sexy. Well, they're sexy, but they're also scary.
Yeah, and he plays it with a good amount of charisma in the
Mhm.
midst of all that too. Like he's a showman, you know.
Yeah,
He's
confidence.
violent. He's a yeah, yeah. And so I think that the way they chose to do that was just very well done.
Yeah, he knocked out the part too. Like, gotta give him credit for being that villain like that. It was very well done.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to wrap up the character section there and let's jump into the lore a little bit here. I didn't really notice this the first viewing. I noticed it, but I didn't notice what it meant to the story. So the movie opens and it talks about how there are many cultures who have legends of being able to conjure past, present, and future people through music. And so it starts with that. That's in the trailer. That's in the it's the first thing they show on the scene. But what I noticed the second way through is that they mention three cultures right there too. They mentioned the Irish, the Choctaw, and the West African cultures. And those three cultures we see all three of in the movie. The Choctaw being the Native Americans that are chasing Remmick in his
In the very
opening
beginning.
scene.
Yep.
That adds a different dynamic to his character too, where it's like he's trying to do this.
Mhm.
Like he's hunting people from these cultures, right?
Yeah, you can see probably like the reason why is like these are the cultures that historically in America there was a period of times where these were the ones that were like the most hated. What happened to the Indians in America, the Irish Americans when they came over, and how they were treated at first until
Yeah.
until black people took the place of the most hated by certain groups in the country. You know what I mean? And then also the film also has Asian Americans in there who same thing. They came over and they experienced hatred and violence from but Americans who are here,
Yeah.
and that's definitely on purpose.
Yeah. There's this thing that's talked about with people who have experienced different types of oppression.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
And
Yeah.
they talk about how people who are oppressed very often take that and once they've risen above it or moved past it, they will then oppress others.
Someone else. Yeah, exactly.
You know, because that's what was done with them. That's what they now know. And they don't
Mm-hmm.
always do it on purpose. Sometimes it's subconscious, but they are doing it.
Yeah.
And it's not an always thing. It's just a phenomenon that happens. And so I think that's, kind of the idea that they're presenting here, that that's what he's doing. His people were oppressed
Mm-hmm.
in many different ways in America, and now he's oppressing these other cultures that they're the only ones really the Irish had power over at that
Mm-hmm.
at
Yeah.
that point, simply because despite everything else, the Irish were white. So
Mm-hmm.
groups like the Ku Klux Klan would while they look down on them, they don't look as down on them. So
Exactly.
it's interesting in that perspective, but he's trying to use the powers of these other two to try and like conjure up his old culture. And so first he goes to the Choctaw, doesn't work. They chase him away. Who knows how long they've been hunting him,
Right.
but he doesn't get that ability from them. So he moves on to these people, and he's like, okay, Sammy, you're next.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's a really interesting way to present the story is through that lens, which is definitely, I think, a strength of the story.
Yeah, I wanted to talk for a moment here about the actual lore behind the vampires, because I thought it was really interesting the different pieces they decided to include in it. So for one, they included garlic. We
Yeah.
never see anybody include garlic in the lore anymore. So I appreciated that so much, and the way they do it, where she's got like the water that
Mm-hmm.
she's been, or well, it'd be like water and vinegar that she's been pickling garlic in, and
Yeah.
splashes it on him. That was really cool that they decided to do that.
Right. And they do a bunch of vampire greatest hits. Like they have to be invited inside is a big aspect of that. And
really
yeah,
loved to see that. You know,
yeah,
that was a big thing on like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and all that, but
yeah.
you don't see it that much anymore.
And it's really cool how they did it too, because it's like it's a club and there's a bouncer, and like you gotta get past the bouncer, which is something we've all kind of probably had an experience once or twice in our lives with. It's just a really interesting way. Like no one's thought of doing that story before. Like vampires want to get in a club, they gotta get past the bouncer. Kind of a
Yeah.
really cool way of doing it.
And they could not get past the bouncer.
Nope.
Yeah, and then you got your classics. You got, they drink
Stake in
blood,
the heart. Oh, sorry.
stake in the heart, aversion to sunlight, the sharing of memories. That one is a little new. I think it's been alluded to or discussed here and there, but they really dig into that here. You know.
No, I agree. They pointed that out because I don't know if I've seen it to this extent, but it makes sense kind of that if you turn someone into the same monster as you share something with them at least.
Yeah, and I can't think of a movie or show where they did that, but I feel like they have. You know what I mean?
I'm
But
sure.
like
I'm sure I've seen it. Yeah.
just like you said, not to the extent.
Yeah.
Then obviously the scene with Remmick where he like jumps in the air, so there's obviously a little bit of like flying slash jumping thing that he can do there.
Yeah. They don't really
The
show
oth-
super strength, but that's not in all vampire types either.
No, they didn't show that. They may not have that.
But that's okay.
Glowing eyes.
Oh, the red eyes were so cool. And then it wasn't just the red eyes. It was also kind of like the dead blank eyes that they would have too in certain scenes.
Yeah,
Just
so one thing I want to watch out for in this one is that people had pointed out, I'd seen online, that the characters had different colored eyes. And they think it has to do with sort of like where they're at in their journey of being a vampire, you know?
oh,
Like because Remmick's been around a lot longer, his eyes have like a different hue to them. You know,
yeah, okay.
they said that some of them were shifting between red, yellow, and blue, even. And I want to take this with a grain of salt because I saw somebody that was talking about saying like, oh, I think that Stack had blue eyes because he hadn't killed anybody, and it's like, no, he killed Annie. So
He definitely did. Yeah.
he did kill people. Like, let's not do that. But
I
but it's something I want to watch out for.
guess Remmick did have the most red. His eyes are
Yeah.
definitely the most red for
And
sure.
I think that's probably because he's been around the longest. You know, you get certain abilities and all that come with, being around longer. So all these abilities that we're talking about, I would imagine just you become stronger with all of them as time goes on. One thing that I did read about the glowing eyes is that he actually was inspired by that, by the portrayal of death in Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. Did you see that?
I thoroughly enjoyed that movie. I was surprised how much I liked it.
I just saw Puss in Boots, the first one, for the first time the other day, and I was like, nobody told me this was like an animated version of Desperado. Like,
Yeah, it's fun.
or
You should
like
watch
the Mask of Zorro, kind of.
Yeah, it's a fun movie. The second one's really good too. I was surprised by it because it came out like 10 years after the first one, and it was surprising.
Is
I
The
get that
Last
though.
Wish the second or the third one?
Second, I believe. No, there is three. I apologize. There is three because the second one has Zach Galifianakis in it as like Humpty Dumpty.
That was
I
the
don't
first
remember. Was it okay? Maybe there's just two then.
one. Okay, that's where he got the inspiration for the glowing eyes.
It's
from
creepy.
death in that one.
He's creepy in that movie. Like the death in that movie, like the wolf is scary for children. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
I found him creepy.
I'm sure. So next up, let's talk about music.
Mm-hmm.
So the score in this was done by Ludwig Göransson. He actually went to film school with Ryan Coogler. They did a number of student films together, which led to eventually Göransson has scored every single one of Ryan Coogler's movies at this point. So I was that's pretty crazy, right?
It is.
He was nominated for an Oscar for Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, and he won an Oscar for Black Panther.
That's awesome.
On top of that, he also won 2 Emmys for The Mandalorian. He also did The Book of Boba Fett, which has a pretty good score as well. And then he did Tenet and Oppenheimer, which he also won an Oscar for Oppenheimer as well. But despite all of that, I think this is a better soundtrack than all of those still. So I would not be surprised if this soundtrack gets him another one. I'm going to buy this soundtrack on vinyl when they release it.
I think I would too.
Super into it. I've basically listened to nothing but this album on repeat since Thursday night.
There's a great scene in the movie where I think it's Smoke says white people like the blues. They just don't like who's singing it. And I'm like, that is
Oh
so
yeah.
true. That's so true. And it's the music is obviously a key. We've talked about a bunch. A key element in this movie, and it's executed so well.
Yeah. And on that note, there's a history in blues and other music as well of white singers and studios constantly stealing the
Oh
music
yeah,
from the black singers in this era specifically.
Elvis.
And so yeah, all of that really ties into this.
Well,
Yeah,
later,
yeah,
but
Elvis is a really good example. There's a ton of examples
a
out
ton
there,
of them. Yeah, yeah. It was a well known fact that they would do that.
Yeah. One thing that stood out to me each time I listen to the album and when I'm watching it is that, especially in the first half of it, there's like these sinister cues that they've worked into the score where it might be like just this, folky bluesy jam that's going, but
Hmm.
then all of a sudden there'll be like a hint of something sinister there for a moment, and then it'll go away. And then it comes back and it's in like that scene with Annie and Smoke when they're together, and then you all of a sudden it starts to turn dark for a moment
Hmm.
where like I swear almost every scene it happens where it keeps alluding that like, hey, everything seems to look like it's going well here, but there is something evil on the
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
So the music keeps reminding you, and the music is basically playing almost non-stop during this movie.
Mhm.
There are scenes where it is completely quiet, and that's intentional, but the music is almost constantly there through the whole thing.
Right.
And but like that whole thing in the first half where like it keeps it keeps turning where it's like everything, it sounds nice, and then all of a sudden it's like, like it just turn,
Mm.
like they turn the sinister up for just a moment and then they turn it back down until finally when you meet the vampire, and then at the end of that scene there's like that big operatic explosion,
Mhm.
and you hear what's going to be his theme, and you only hear it for like a couple seconds and then it's gone. So that's almost like the crescendo of the cues that they're laying the breadcrumbs for. They climax right there and then they're gone until it's full force. You're hearing his full, villain musical.
Yeah, yeah. Completely agree. When you were talking about like awards, like for people who were in this movie down the line, I thought I was going to mention, but I figured you were going to get to it. Like the dude has two already, and I feel like he's set himself up very well for getting a third on this. It's gonna be hard to beat this music.
Yes. I think it's going to be very difficult. I put nothing past the Academy
Doing
for
something stupid.
overlooking things because,
Yeah,
like as we talked about, Challengers didn't even get a nomination last year.
it's true.
But
Trent
with
Reznor
that
was
being
so
said,
sad.
they pushed for it, and he's gotten it twice already, right?
Yeah, yeah.
He got it for Black Panther. This is I think a much better score than Black Panther.
Yeah.
And Black Panther, it was like, it's, I don't want to take anything away from it because that was like, this is almost like the Black Panther of this year. Like it really does have that sort of cultural significance. But I think that it has more to it. There's more substance to it. So I think he's got a really, really, really good chance of winning this.
I agree.
Not even just getting nominated, but winning. So I think this is a good place to transition into the big scene of the movie. So the Surreal Montage is what they're calling it. And man, tell me about what you thought of this scene.
So yeah, not something I expected. And when it first started happening, I had a brief moment of, what are they doing here? And then after just a couple of seconds, like you kind of just you fall into it and you start enjoying it. You start searching for the next reference that'll pop up, the next piece of cultural history that musical cultural history that will pop up, and you'd be like, oh, I get that reference. Oh, I get that. You know,
Yeah.
and it's really well done, and it's like the roofs burning during it, and like there's a whole thing about like opening the veil and things
Yeah.
crossing over, and yeah.
Where they pierce the veil,
Hmm.
and yeah. Super, super, super cool. And the fact that like that's what it represents, like the audience, and I think Remmick sees it, right.
Oh yeah,
he
he
sees
says he hears
he
it.
sees Well, like he sees that the I think it's the barn
Hmm.
walls and roof burning away. That's like the veil, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And the audience sees it and Remmick sees it, but nobody else
Yeah.
knows that just happened from a spiritual plane
Hmm.
perspective. What's really interesting about that scene is that they shot it in one day as one continuous shot.
That's crazy.
So, and that's what I really, really, really noticed the second time. Because like you said, you have no idea this is about to happen. You don't realize the levity of this scene and what
Hmm.
you're watching until you're like a minute into it and you're like,
Holy crap.
holy shit.
Yeah.
And like you don't even realize you're watching a one shot,
Yeah.
you know? And
I
the
did.
way they transition it, and it's a one shot on a film camera that is also an IMAX camera. IMAX cameras are notoriously heavy. These things are like 65 to 100 pounds.
Right.
And so doing a one shot where, man, I was so blown away watching it the second time because you can just see that the camera's panning and it's going slowly from person to person and everybody's just dancing and spinning and doing all these things around the camera and they're changing the structure of things that are happening around them and they're moving so much. There's so many moving pieces to this, and then you take into account the spiritual and the cultural significance of all of it, and it's just it's one of the coolest scenes I've seen shot in years, I think. And it's one that I think everybody's going to appreciate much, much more every time they watch it happen. So this one really stands out to me, and I think once this is available on digital and on everything where people are able to start sharing that video, I think more and more people are gonna see this accidentally and start to be like, whoa, what was that? Like, I gotta go see this movie, So, but like you said, like it hits you hard the first time, but there's a moment where you don't realize you're watching something that's about to like hit you as hard as it does.
Right.
Because you have no idea what's going on in that moment, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, like, oh, I get it, and it's mind blowing and it's impressive, and I didn't even think like, have they cut the camera at all? I don't know if they have, but like,
yeah, it's really cool. And then the couple of the Asian characters, like when they're going through the scene and they're like the wife's dancing through the crowd, and all of a sudden you see musicians from Asian culture popping up. You're like, oh, so this is just the veil for everyone.
Yeah, everybody that's in there, because basically they're performing a ritual right now. They just don't know it, and they're all in that bubble performing it together through their communal experience.
Completely, yeah. It's really well done, and you said it kind of sneaks up on you, as I said, and then that's gonna be one of those scenes you remember 20 years from now.
Yes. One of the things that they said about that scene, this was Ryan Coogler. He said, it's about that feeling of being at a live performance of any art, the feeling of euphoria. I've had a few of those moments in my life, and you feel immortal, like you are outside of space and time for a moment, like there's another presence there with you.
Right. And we both like to go to concerts. We've both been at a show, and like all of a sudden, like you have that feeling that it's something special what you're seeing,
Yeah.
And I'm sure other people have experienced too. That's what the power of music, and that's something that this movie really does well to convey, is that music's important. Like, you need to have it.
Yeah, very well put, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's jump into inspirations. First, we got From Dusk Till Dawn.
Yep.
There's some obvious connections here. That's a movie where you think it's telling one story for half the movie, roughly, and then it jumps into being a vampire movie. Yeah. Same as here. I do think this is better than From Dusk Till Dawn.
I would agree. I like From Dusk Till Dawn, but this is a much better movie.
Yeah, From Dusk Till Dawn is a lot of fun, but there's so many aspects. Like, I like the vampire design here better. I think that this is just a wholly more impressive experience. But I do like From Dusk Till Dawn, and I appreciate how that led to this. That's something you very much can appreciate.
Right. From Dusk Till Dawn has over the top kind of characters. like the guy with the dick gun and everything else.
Oh yeah.
And like this is like
About
how you forget about the dick gun and
Sex
and
machine.
sex machine and this is much more actual people. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Not to give Dust to Dawn
These
crap.
feel like real people you would meet.
Yeah, I'm not going to run into a guy with a dick gun. If I do, it's going to be a surprise. I don't want it. But
Right. Also, I think there's some pretty clear inspirations here from Interview with the Vampire. The ending scene where it jumps from you spent the whole movie in the past and then you're in the present, you know, 30 years ago, but you know, you get it.
yeah,
Interview with the Vampire does that at the end, and I think the correlation there should at least be mentioned. The movie as a whole actually really reminded me of Interview with the Vampire. For a lot of different reasons, the movies have parallels while not being that similar. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm. Yeah,
John Carpenter's The Thing.
yeah. I was going to bring that
Coogler
up.
mentioned this many times. You know, The Thing is. It was like one of his, I think he said his father's favorite movies. You know, so there was one scene in particular that really stood out.
Garlic scene.
Yeah. And so when that was happening, I was like, yep, this is just like the blood test scene in The Thing. He also said that The Faculty was one of his big inspirations.
Yeah, I saw that, and I was kind of that one I didn't quite get, but if you want to fill me in on that one.
Well, so for one, they have their own version of the blood test scene in The Faculty where they're doing.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Where they're doing the drugs that they have to sniff as they go around. So there's that, but there's also, it's like that whole idea of the whole town around you becoming assimilated into this other monster that's trying to assimilate everybody into it. And they are trying to convince you that it will be better if you just go along with it, you know?
Okay. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's absolutely true. And also, don't do drugs, kids.
Yeah. He's tweaking. Let him tweak.
Yeah, I was definitely gonna bring up the Thing scene because like when the garlic scene happened, I'm like, oh my god, that's the Thing, and Holly gave me a look, and I'm like, oh, you got to watch the Thing now.
You're like, no, that's the Thing.
There's the Thing from the Thing.
They did the Thing.
The Thing from the Thing. It's
Yeah.
very, very easy to let her know what I was talking about.
Yeah, I think anybody who's a big fan of that Thing immediately made that connection.
Yeah.
No Country for Old Men, he said that was one of his big inspirations. I think a lot of that is probably just in the overall feeling of doom and gloom that movie presents, but also it's kind of like a Western, a slightly updated Western, you know, a much more updated Western than this. But this has a lot of Western vibes to it too, and I think that's probably what he was thinking of. For me, I thought of Django Unchained a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. I had big From Dusk Till Dawn references and big The Thing scene, and yeah, I can see the Faculty now that you pointed out. I just didn't make that connection when I was watching it, but it makes sense.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about the ending now for a moment.
The real ending.
Right. You have multiple endings. So the first ending is when they kill Remmick. And that, when he's blowing up into the fire and rising into the
really
sky.
Cool.
Yeah, super cool. And I think that is part of his power too. You know, because all the other people didn't burn up. They just burned up regular, but because he's been around for so long, he burns and makes a show of that too.
Fire tornado.
Right, and then the next scene is when Smoke kills all the KKK guys. Awesome scene.
A lot of fun.
I kind of wish they hadn't shown that in the trailer too.
Yeah.
Because I'm waiting for it the whole time.
You know he's gonna fire a Tommy gun at some point.
Yeah, you're like, okay, well it's nighttime now, so he's gonna make it the daytime, and then he's gonna because I saw that.
Don't you hate that?
I think of these things, and so I was like,
I'm the same way. I'm like, I know this is coming still.
I knew it was going to be the KKK guys too. Like I knew all of it, but like it didn't take it away from it at all. But you know what really added to that is when Annie comes back. You know, when her spirit appears. That
with the baby.
Yeah, I cried a little bit at that part.
It's a very emotional scene as he's fading from existence and she's there to greet him pretty much.
Right. And it was interesting that she told him to put a cigarette out because she didn't want to get any smoke on the baby.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think there was like a dual meaning to that, you know, because like she always calls him by his real name, right? She doesn't call him Smoke.
Right, which
Smoke
is
is like his like alter ego. I think it's Ezekiel.
Elijah.
Elijah.
Elijah, Smoke, and Elias stack.
Yeah, I saw somebody else point out online that when it comes to the way he passes, he rises right to heaven. He doesn't die there. And I guess in the Bible, there's a character, like this is a biblical name,
Really?
which that part I'm aware of, but he doesn't die. He just goes straight to heaven.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I thought that was interesting that they didn't show him die. It's just inferred that he just goes with her.
Yeah.
You know?
That's cool.
Yeah, but she's like, you've got to leave Smoke behind to do.
Don't want to get the smoke on him. Yeah.
You know, you Elijah can only come, Smoke can't.
Yeah. I saw that. I saw somewhere that he got the idea for Smoke and Stack from a Howling Wolf song called "Smokestack Lightning." Did you hear anything about that?
Yeah, I did hear something about that, but I didn't dig into that at all. Did you?
Not really. No, I just that Howling Wolf's an older blues musician, and that's where they got the name from. I thought that was kind of a cool idea.
Yeah, I should listen to that song after this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Howling Wolf has one big song, and I can't quite think of it. You keep going. I'm going to try to find it real quick.
Okay. So yeah, after that scene, you've got the wrap up of him deciding with his father that he's not going to put the guitar down, and the credits start. It's really cool the way they do that, where they start to show. So it's Buddy Guy, the blues musician, playing this aged version of Sammy, and it shows him sort of playing guitar throughout the years, like interspaced with the credits, until you finally have the final scene where Stack and Mary come and meet Sammy, aged 80-something, sitting at the bar with a drink and his guitar. And I wasn't sure about this scene initially when I watched it, but now I think it's like, this scene really is, I think it's essential, and I think it's kind of genius too, because one of the things that it does is it contextualizes that all of this happened within the lifetime of people that are still around today, you know?
Right.
Or at least still around for people like you and I to have met, our grandparents. You know, like my grandma, who's not still around, but she was until a few years ago, she was born in the 1920s.
Right.
You know, and so a lot of people's grandparents or older people that they know were around during the 30s. And so showing this contextualizes it, that it's like, hey, this wasn't that long ago that the KKK, that slaves, that plantations, that all
Jim
this
Crow
stuff.
South. Yeah.
There's a lot of people alive today that were alive during this. It helps contextualize all of that.
It does. Absolutely agree. Yeah.
But what really, really stood out to me is it gives the opportunity for Stack to have that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think when
bit of closure.
When Sammy mentions to him that, like, hey, you know, at least once a week I wake up from a dream and I'm thinking about that night. And before the sun went down, I think that might be the best day of my life. Was it the same way for you? And the fact that there's a moment there where you're thinking about it, and you know that Stack is a smartass, and you're just wondering how he's going to react to it. And the fact that he stops and he thinks, and you know he's been young this whole time. He didn't age through all of this. He's dressed young right now, so he's stayed hip during all of it too. He stayed young and has probably lived so many lifetimes in this time as a young person, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that he stops, and despite all that, he's like, yeah, that is how it is for me, because that's the last time I saw my brother, and that's the last time I saw the sunlight, or the sunrise, or whatever, the
sunrise,
And for just a brief moment that night, all of us were free. Yeah. And I literally, the second time I watched that, I started to cry a little bit there too.
Yeah.
Because just the way it's delivered is so touching, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really good. The Howling Wolf song that I think is called Backdoor Man. I'm your backdoor man. I think it's been covered by a lot of people, but I think that's the song I know. I think that's the song of his I know.
Yeah, okay. I am aware of that song.
It just means comes to the back door. That's all it means.
Yeah. So I really liked that, and that's the way they ended the movie, and I think it's really the perfect way to end it. And what it also does is, like, it wraps up that story for Stack and Mary, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, hey, look, you probably forgot about them, but they're still here. They did a whole lot. And they got and he got a whole lot. So you've wrapped up their entire story arc, you know,
Right.
in one movie. So you don't necessarily ever have to make another movie in this series. You know, it's all wrapped up very nicely.
And I would be happy if they just kind of left it as it is. I mean, we know how Hollywood is. We'll see how it does, but I'm okay with it just being this.
Yeah. I think that you could easily do a sequel or a prequel. If they did a sequel, I think you focus on, like I said, Stack and Mary.
Yeah.
You could also, if they do it soon enough, you could do it like sequel, prequel style, where they're telling the story of what happened in Chicago, and maybe, you know, Capone's guys are hunting after Stack.
And then he's a vampire.
All this. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that could be fun.
It could be very fun. That's where I would go with it. And then you maybe you lead that fight for, you can make it last for years and years of them being hunted for a while, and eventually they kill all of them or whatever, and then you could do another one where it's like, you know, stretching through the periods. I don't know.
The civil rights movement in the 60s, stuff like that.
Yeah. You know, there's a ton of rich things to be had in there that I think Ryan Coogler could really dig into. But he should only do it if he's got a story to tell, right? If it's as emotional to him as this was.
Right. And so, yeah, just to reiterate, like, this is like a 10 out of 10 movie for me. It's going to be something I'm going to buy on, as you said, you already pre-ordered the Steelbook. I'll probably do the same at some point. It was, I went into it hyped and it didn't let me down, which is always just such a good feeling.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was completely blown away by this. And the cinematography, I think, you know, that is another one that's probably going to be up for an Oscar.
Mm-hmm.
I think that because both Black Panther and Black Panther Wakanda Forever won Oscars, I have to imagine this one does too, right?
They got to push for it.
Like, if you're going to give them to Ryan Coogler for his Marvel movies, and he comes out with something like this that just completely blows everybody away, like, I really, 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 like, I think then we need to keep this one in the conversation for the year.
Right. You know how much the Academy doesn't like horror, but if it's transcendent.
It's transcendent, and I really do think this one sort of transcends any one single genre.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens with that, but I'm also really looking forward to seeing what everybody does after this too. Yeah. You know, I don't know if you heard, but Ryan Coogler is set to do an X-Files reboot now.
Nice.
That's what's next on his plate.
I had not heard that.
He said, and it's going to be really scary.
Awesome. That makes me happy.
So the fact
that makes me really happy, actually.
He's now going to dive into that, like, that is so awesome to me, because honestly, that franchise needs it.
It needs to go back to the basics.
Yeah, spend a couple years on X-Files and then come back out with something original again.
I'm in for it.
I'm in for it too. But I think that I think this movie cements, you know, between his filmography leading into this and then this specifically, I think it cements him as one of the great directors of our generation. Yep. You know, right up there with Christopher Nolan, Denis Villeneuve. I think he's right on that list now. That's a good place to wrap up. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, everyone.